Hi, my name is Noah. I'm doing this sheep brain dissection for Anatomy and Physiology Lab 1. So just to start out with, we're going to talk about the meninges. On this specimen, there is no dura mater, which is the outermost meninge. There's two in the cranial cavity, and it is responsible for holding in the cerebral spinal fluid. The innermost, or the middle meninge, is called the arachnoid. Again, on the specimen, there is none, but within this layer is many of the blood vessels that supply blood to the brain. And then the innermost meninge is called the pia mater, and this hugs tightly to the brain. It also surrounds the blood vessels as they enter the brain, or the capillaries as they enter the brain. As well as this, astrocytes hug the capillaries and secrete chemicals that create tight junction gaps in the capillaries, endothelium cells. This produces the blood-brain barrier. Now, moving from the outside of the brain, we're going to look at more at the inside. So the cerebrum is this entire lobe, or this entire part here. It's the upper part of the brain. There's two hemispheres of it. This is one. There's also one on the other side that we dissected. This is split into a couple different lobes. The frontal lobe starts at the front here and goes to the precentral gyru. Gyrus are these ridges you can see here. Osuculize are the folds within the brain. The parietal lobe is just posterior to the frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is responsible for sensory perception. Going back to the frontal lobe, it is responsible for things like voluntary movement and self-control and impulse control. The occipital lobe can be found back here by the cerebellum. This processes visual information, and then the temporal lobe can be found on the side here and mainly processes sounds and memories. The cortex is just the outermost layer of the cerebrum. It contains all of the gray matter within the brain. So now moving from there, we are going to look at this structure right here called the corpus callosum. It is a band of nervous tissue that connects both hemispheres of the brain. So again, this is one hemisphere, there's another one on the other side. This corpus callosum connects the two and allows them to communicate with each other. Moving directly below this, we can talk about the creation of cerebral spinal fluid. It starts by being created in things called choroid plexuses. These are within the ventricles of the brain, and they create cerebral spinal fluid. The first two ventricles are called the lateral ventricles, so there's one here and then one on the other side. These move into the third ventricle. The third ventricle is then connected to the fourth via something called the cerebral aqueduct right here. And then this is the fourth ventricle, and from the fourth ventricle it moves to the sagittal sinuses around the brain, or down the brainstem into the spinal column. Down here at the brainstem, we can talk about how it is divided. Starting with the medulla oblongata here. It is responsible for many involuntary processes like heartbeat, breathing, vomiting, swallowing, things like that. Moving up the brainstem, here's the pons. It also helps control breathing, as well as connects certain movement cortexes within the cerebrum with the cerebellum. The cerebellum is this structure right here. And then the midbrain, which is right above the pons, it coordinates movements of the head, eyes, and trunks to visual and auditory stimuluses. This is like if you hear a loud noise and orientate your body towards it and your eyes towards it. The midbrain is responsible for that movement. Within the brainstem, there are many of the junctions for the cranial nerves. So down in the medulla, it's 8 and 12. The pons is 5 and 8, and the midbrain is 3 and 4. The cerebellum back here, we were just talking about it. It has a lot of different grooves in it, and its main job is to refine and smooth out muscle movements that are sent from the primary motor cortexes through the pons into the cerebellum, and then gets refined and then sent to skeletal muscles. From here, we can move to the diencephalon, which is the thalamus and the hypothalamus. This is the thalamus. It is a relay station for the entire brain. It basically connects the brainstem and the cerebrum, and connects a majority of the brain to itself. The hypothalamus is found just inferior to that, and it regulates homeostasis, such as like body temperature, fluid levels, things like that. The hippocampus actually wraps around here and is responsible for emotion, along with structures such as the amygdala. The hypophysis, or the pituitary gland, is directly below that, and it's a control center for a lot of the endocrine glands within the body. The pineal body can be seen right here. It is a gland that secretes melatonin. Melatonin is what our body uses to regulate our sleep cycles. Moving from the pineal gland, we can go to the olfactory bulb, which is right here. The olfactory bulb is used to process smelling. And then below that, the optic chiasma, which is the crossing point of the optic nerve. The optic nerve can be seen here. It's this white structure here, and its crossing point would be right directly here. Moving to the cross section of the brain that we did earlier, to point out the gray and white matter. The gray matter can be seen on the outside here. It's all this gray. This would be the neural bodies of neurons, and they're all unmyelinated. The white here would be things like axons that create tracks that connect all of the neuron bodies to each other and to the spinal column. These axons are myelinated, and that's what gives them that white color. Hopefully this was all done correctly, and I hope you had a good semester. Thank you.